Hello, and welcome to Sobercast, where we provide AA speaker meetings and workshops in podcast format. We're an ad-free podcast, and if you enjoy listening, please help us be self-supporting by visiting Sobercast.com, look for the donate link, and drop $1 or $2 into our virtual basket. We hope you enjoy the podcast. Have a great day.
Well, since I was so late, I was drunk. I'm not anymore. Thank you very much. My name is John, and I'm an alcoholic. I usually identify with both of my names, except when things are being taped. So, but I would think a few of you probably know what my last name is, and it really doesn't matter, though. But I have had things show up in weird places. So, I'm just John. I'd like to thank everyone involved with asking me to come here tonight, and I also like to offer my apologies for being as late as I was. I was just unprepared for the amount of traffic that I mean, you guys all must be hiding from the cops to be this far out of... I thought at any moment I was going to pass a place where I'd have to show my passport or something. But it's I who live far from you, not you who live far from me. So, right? Right. Wow. You know, whenever I stand up at one of these podiums or speak at a meeting, even though my nerves are somewhat frazzled usually, it's pretty simple for me because luckily I'm given very specific instructions on what I'm supposed to talk to you about. You know, I'm going to tell you what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And for this alcoholic, it's, the story doesn't change. Some of the incidents grow probably more grandiose as time goes on. There were more booze, more women consumed than actually probably were in the final analysis. More attempted bank robberies, more international intrigue. But mostly I sat in my car and drank. You know, that's really what it came down to. I'm always so impressed with these events also when there's a sobriety countdown. Impressed and somewhat curious a lot of the time because, as we all see, when one starts asking for very, very long-term sobriety, the number is rather sparse. And I sometimes wonder, I look at myself now with 21 years and realizing that in most meetings that I go to personally, during birthday celebrations, etc., I am either the penultimate or even the ultimate person taking a cake. And that's been happening since like 18 or 19 years. I go to very small meetings in very small towns. I don't live in Los Angeles. I live in a very small mountain town in Idaho and only come to LA when I have to work. But, and I'm always curious about that, if after 25 years or so that you just, that there is a cure they're not telling us about, that... I mean, is it sort of like the Freemasons or Scientologists that you do cross the bridge at some point and you don't have to come back anymore, or do most of us just die at some point? But really, what the reality is, I suppose, and I'm, I would consider myself a pessimist by nature, and. The old saying that the optimist being the guy that sees the glass half full, the pessimist being the guy that sees the glass half empty. But my personality as such is I just keep wondering who the hell's going to knock the glass over. But I suppose the truth is, and it's something I keep reminding myself of, most drunks die drunk. It's just the way it is. If we believe statistics, over 50% of us in this room will get loaded again, regardless of how many years you have. And I always like to start. These days I start this little pitch of mine just because I'm still not really over it, and it's an object lesson constantly for me. A few years ago, I had a very close friend. Our sobriety dates were 6 months apart. I got sober in February of 1982, and he got sober in June of 1982. He was a director. The summer before both of us got sober, he directed me in a play. I didn't know he was a drunk. He didn't know I was a drunk. He might have gotten an idea when I was sort of, like tonight, late for my entrance a few times. I just forgot how long I was supposed to stay off stage, and I was at a bar around the corner drinking. And twice he had to go on stage for me. It's kind of hard to explain to an audience in the midst of a performance that the actor will be here momentarily, but he still's got some drinking to do. But regardless, he got sober in June, and I always sort of, rubbed it in his face that I had 6 months more than he. And a few years later, and we stayed very close, and a few years later, he became one of the co-founders of a cousin program of Alcoholics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous. And his name was Johnny S. And through his contribution to this program, to the program of Cocaine Anonymous, it gave, particularly in Hollywood where I got sober, sort of an entry point to addicts that didn't feel comfortable in rooms, especially in the early 80s. Most of the rooms that I went to were just old men in trench coats smoking Marlboros and drinking coffee in the basements of churches with bad lighting, and you would be handed a cup of coffee and a Marlboro when you walked in and told to sit down. And so by creating this program, cocaine, as far as my experience is concerned, really whoops your ass a lot faster than alcohol does. And if you do enough cocaine, you're down and out very, very quickly. And relatively young. And so anyway, I'm not going to belabor this too long, but he helped start that program and directly and indirectly probably saved thousands of lives. And about 3 years ago, I was in England for 7 months doing a project, and I was to speak at a convention in Twin Falls, Idaho, which I could not attend because I was in Europe. And so I asked Johnny to take my place, which he did. And my house is about 70 miles north of Twin Falls, Idaho. And I told him to go up to my house and spend a week or so and just relax. My house is a gorgeous location on a river and very pretty in the mountains. And he did. And he wrote me a letter and left it in the house after he stayed there. Very lovely, thanking me, etc. And there were a few references in the letter that confused me, but I paid not much attention to it because Johnny was a dramatic person and a loner like I. And I kept emailing him from England and didn't get a response, which was unusual. And he was found dead in his house after several days. A week or so before that, he had parked his car several blocks from his house so that people would think he was not home. He had stopped answering his phone. He had stopped communicating with his sponsor or with anyone in the program. And one night, he ate a couple of bottles of pain pills and died. And it mortified me. It devastated me. For 6 months after he died, I kept writing him emails, basically saying, and excuse me for any children in the house, what the fuck did you stop doing? What happened? Because our birthdays are, 6 months apart. So I was just along the same path as he, at the same spot in sobriety. I've always been very active. He was always very active. And it somehow crept back into his mind that it was okay to do this. And the pills were given to him by a doctor, legitimately given to him by a doctor because of an operation he had, which I am in complete agreement with. If you're in pain and you're under doctor's care, give me the morphine drip. I'll take it as long as I know the doctor's there and I know how much I'm going to have to get, and I'm not going to go through the pain if I don't have to. I'm not going to do what Rush Limbaugh did, but I don't think my housekeeper could get that many drugs anyway, so maybe if I wanted to go out on tequila, she could help me, but I don't think. But as thinking about it and wondering what happened, and the object lesson for me, and the reason I share this now, is it happened to another friend of mine. He's not dead, but it's over 25 years, an artist, and one day he just picked up a bottle of wine and drank it. I mean, what the hell are you thinking? And I'm not sure he's back. I wrote him and, again, didn't receive a letter from him. I even flew to his house, couldn't find him. But the object lesson for me was this. The worst thing you can ever possibly become in this program is a star. It's hard for me to be in any room in the world and be just an anonymous drunk. Because of what I do for a living, my image is pretty ubiquitous in most countries in the world, particularly now because of satellite televisions, etc. When I was in England doing this miniseries, I thought I would have the freedom to go to, some little, I went to a meeting in a street called Lamb's Conduit. I mean, the street itself is like a block long. And there were like 4 people in the room, all Irish, the old saying in my family was the reason God created alcohol was to keep the Irish from ever ruling the world. So I could understand that. And I walk in a room, and this Irishman walks up to me and goes, "You're that funny fella from TV, aren't you?" In the middle of nowhere. I'm in the middle of a tiny place. So anyway, a lot of people know who I am, so it's hard for me just to sit in a room and dump, And I know what went through Johnny's mind. And it was that how could he, having achieved the notoriety and fame that he had achieved in this program, to be willing to walk into a room and go, "Guess what I did last night?" And I know he couldn't do that. I just know he couldn't do that. And so, instead of doing that, he offed himself. For me, it's just that I am just, a day away. Today is it, right? 21 years away from arm's length away from the next one. So I say to that, I usually I'm still flabbergasted by it, because it scares the hell out of me to think that you could spend this much time in this program and it not be such second nature to you now. The realization that your life has been altered beyond your wildest imagination, that you live a relatively sane, relatively pain-free life, and that something could happen to you that would make you think that by picking up that glass or that needle or that joint, that it was going to get better. I still ponder it every day. So let me qualify first, real quickly, so that you know I do belong here, and I'm not just like researching a role that I'm going to do at some point. I was, very quickly, biographically, I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, raised there, didn't leave New Orleans until I was 21 years old. Only child of an extremely Catholic family, taught by Jesuits and Dominicans and Holy Cross Brothers and nuns all of my school years. My father left when I was 2 years old, and as far as I know, he was an alcoholic, although I never saw him again after that, except once, as I recall, and I'm not even sure if this is absolutely true, that he came and got me once when I was 7 years old for some reason, and went to the racetrack and took me there with him. I remember that for some reason, and I think it's true. But I do remember once being asked to go to his house, and my mother said, "You can't because they may poison you." Because in the 50s in New Orleans, when families divorced, you didn't spend quality time with both parts of your family. He was dead to my mother, and he was dead to her family. So I knew nothing about my surname. I knew nothing about their family. And I have no siblings. So I grew up in a very loving but strict Catholic household. I was handed over to the Franciscans and the Marianites when I was 5 years old, and drilled on a daily basis to convince me of my worthlessness, since I was born with original sin, that I had no chance of redeeming myself other than dying in the defense of this belief system called Catholicism. And I believed it. So I always, from the get-go, I thought I was less than, because I was told by my betters that I was. And I was very devout. First thing I ever wanted to be was a priest, and I wanted to be a priest until I was 14 or 15 years old. And somewhat euphemistically, I say that the reason I decided not to do that was because I discovered a German philosopher named Friedrich Nietzsche and my penis. And had I known then what I know now, the penis thing wouldn't have stopped me, right? I mean, I was never molested. I guess I just wasn't cute enough for them or something. I'm not sure why. Why wasn't I good enough for you, Father? I don't... But they certainly beat the crap out of me on a daily basis, so maybe that was their way of engaging me sexually, was just to slap the ever-loving hell out of me on any given day, because I was, from the beginning, although I was a devout Catholic, I was a very questioning one. I did not accept their dogma at face value. And because I was alone a lot, my mother worked to support us. We lived with my grandparents, her mother and father. My grandfather was, a nice man, I suppose. I didn't see him very much. This, again, was, think of the time. This was the early 50s to the mid-60s we lived with them, and he was a longshoreman and worked basically 24/7 at the river, because the Mississippi at that point was so busy that he could work as long as he wanted, made a lot of money. So my grandmother really raised me. He was a very lovely Irish woman, and I was not abused. I did not grow up with any kind of hatred around me. But I did grow up thinking that I was, I guess, unwanted. I don't try to get into the psychological aspect of my life very much, because I don't think it really bloody matters, to try and figure out why I drank. I drank because I'm an alcoholic. Why I'm an alcoholic, I have no bloody idea. Maybe one day somebody will point to that gene and go, there you are, that's why. Because your father and his brother and his father and his father, and it's like, blue eyes. There's enough of those genes in you, you're going to be a drunk too. But we were very Irish and very French. Members of the CIA, Catholic Irish Alcoholics. But the alcoholic personality in me manifested so long before I ever took a drink. I mean, from the time I could remember, I wanted to be somebody else. I didn't, I was never called by my first name. I was never called John. I was called by my first initial, because my father's name was John, and my mother did not want to be reminded of that. So I wasn't even called by my actual Christian name until I was a teenager and moved out of the house and took it upon myself to sort of get away from the nickname Jay and started calling myself John. So even my name was not able to be owned. And to make matters even weirder, my father, named John, remarried, had a son with his new wife, named him John. His father's name, my grandfather's name was John. His father's name was John. So my dad was sort of like the white George Foreman in that regard, and named his first two sons John. So there is this other guy named, with my last name in the phone book of New Orleans, and I often wonder what kind of calls he might get at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I've never met them. I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters, half-sisters, half-brothers. Never met them. Don't know anything about them. When I decided to become an actor in 1976, in the first sort of regular series job I had. I never had normal jobs. No acting job is normal. But the first series I had where I was making regular money was this little series on NBC called Baba Black Sheep, about soldiers during the Second World War, Marine pilots during the Second World War. And I was making good money for a 25-year-old at the time. It was great. And I thought, it's time to meet my father. It's time to figure that out. It's obviously had an effect on me. By this time I was a full-blown maybe too strong a word. I was a fledgling practicing alcoholic by this point. I really didn't drink a lot as a teenager because I'm a child of the 60s. Marijuana came along. Everybody in New Orleans drank. If you could reach the bar without standing on your toes, they would serve you. It wasn't, you could drink in your car. There were still daiquiri shops, drive-through daiquiri shops, okay? So New Orleans is a drinking place. The signs on the bar say happy hour any waking moment, so I wasn't that attracted to it for some reason. But when I was 17 years old, I discovered marijuana in 1964, whenever it hit New Orleans. It had been there all the time because, again, the river, musicians, New Orleans is a real melting pot of cultures, and you get exposed to a lot of stuff that you wouldn't in other cities. So here I am making money and deciding, this guy John LaRoquette is, somehow important to me, I guess. He's my father. So I made the plans to go to New Orleans and finally confront him, man to man. Made my plane reservations. That morning got word that he had died the night before. Alcoholic. You know, and I got in trouble once in the press for saying that because his sisters went berserk, because I didn't know him, and they accused me of calling him something he wasn't. But he was, look, come on. He died at 53 years old of cirrhosis of the liver. It doesn't take a Rhodes Scholar to figure that one out, you know. And when I say I never knew any of these people, I didn't. The only exposure I ever had to any of those siblings was I was in New Orleans in the late 80s doing a charity function for someone, and I was on stage introducing comics in those, you know, the early days of having several comics come on stage. It was for the Children's Museum. After the event, I'm standing at the bar with a friend, and I noticed a man walking toward me. I'd been sober then by, you know, probably 5 years, in 86, 87. And I see a man walking toward me, very, very drunk man, young man, 30, 31. And as this man is walking toward me, I instantly knew that he was my brother. I mean, he looked so much like my father, which I do not. I looked very much like my mother's side of the family. And it was. Kenneth introduced himself to me, and realizing that he was my brother, I had nothing to say to him. What can you say to him? He's a stranger to me, really. I mean, not to be rude, but, you know, basically Shane shared the same penis at some point, but that was about the only thing we had in common. And he, too, died a year later of cirrhosis of the liver at 32 years old. So there was a long, you know, I like many of us, I'm sure many of us, I come from a long line of alcoholics. In New Orleans, you don't die of alcoholism, though. You die of stroke, or high blood pressure, or falling down the stairs, or being hit by a bus, or being run over by the streetcar. He had a weak heart. Uncle Pat, no, he had a weak heart. Yeah, well, maybe the case of Dixie beer a day helped weaken that heart. I don't know. It's possible. I was such, you know, I was such a coward growing up. I've written about it a lot in fictional form, but I was, you know, I figured that, just looking at it psychologically, this for a moment, if my old man didn't want to stay around, how much worth could I have? If my own father didn't love me enough to want to be with me, I can't be worth crap, right? I mean, what the hell? So so many of my decisions in my life as a young boy and a young man were based on the premise that if you find out who I really am, you'll not want to be around me. So I lied at any chance I could get about who I was or what I did or where I came from. Even made up a story about my father. And at 8 years old, where I got this story, I have no idea. But when people asked me where my dad was, I didn't even know what the job meant. But I said he's a psychiatrist, and he lives on a big farm in Maine, and people come to him for help. So that's why he's never home, because he's helping all these people in Maine. And now that I think about it, maybe my father was Stephen King. I'm not sure, because in Maine. So the best thing that ever happened to me was the 60s. Because along comes the Beatles, right, when I was a teenager. And and I was a musician as well. I started playing music when I was 8 years old. So music was very important to me. It was a communication device that I could use where I didn't have to talk to you. I could express myself vicariously through the horn. You didn't have to know that much about me. I could stand on stage and just do that. So I figured, wouldn't it be great to be somebody else? Wouldn't it be great to be a great English musician? So I created a personality, a man named Preston Macbeth. And assumed his world. You know, did my research, found out where in England I was from, even what schools I went to. I mean, a real fabrication. And had relationships in the world as this fellow, Preston Macbeth. Had lovers. Not just guys in bars saying, yeah, my name's Preston, I'm from the north of England, how are you? No. Lovers. Friends. And I would love to be sitting in a house where there is some 50-year-old woman watching television and going, that son of a bitch looks so much like that guy I knew in the 60s. But that's how afraid I was to show you anything about me. I mean, I didn't know I didn't know any of that. Alcohol and drugs really helped that. Because it didn't matter then. Because I was satisfied with who I was when I was loaded. I could give a crap less what you thought of me. And so I drank a lot during the late 60s when I discovered booze after... and I drank alcoholically from the moment that I started drinking. I was playing a gig, actually, in Biloxi, Mississippi with my band. And we picked up two hitchhikers, two sailors who were about to be shipped off to Vietnam. We went and we robbed a liquor store. That sounds romantic. We snatched a couple of bottles from Safeway. But for a while with that story, there was a shootout, a chase, there was all kinds of stuff. But basically it was grabbing 2 bottles of schnapps and throwing it in the guitar case, I think is what it was. And the sailors had some booze as well. And so we go to this place, we're going to have the gig that we're supposed to play. And we're all tasting, and I was 17 years old, I guess. 17 or almost 18, summer of my 17th year. And everybody took a little, and everybody was kind of like, okay, fine, let's go. And I said, go ahead, I'll be up there, I'll be in the club in a minute. And I sat in the car and proceeded to drink everything that was left in whatever bottles there were. So, from the get-go, there wasn't enough. There just wasn't enough. And I remember, because of the combinations of things, which, slow gin, schnapps, bad wine, there was this Technicolor lunch came out of me. And, my first thought was, well, it's really not good to drink in a car. Because, the fumes and stuff from the heater will make you sick. So the 60s went on like that, and in the, I'm going to go through this really fast because it's just a remarkable, saga of the lengths you will go to avoid any responsibility or taking true stock of who you are. Someone mentioned a story that I sometimes tell in my pitch, which I'm not going to get into today, but, I almost had a man put in jail because of a lie that I told in order to cover my tracks. I joined the Navy in order to avoid being drafted. Good alcoholic logic. The simple road would have been, I was offered a scholarship to college, to LSU, to study acting. And instead of that, I joined the Navy in order to avoid being drafted, because my logic was they weren't going to let me go to college and just study acting. I'd have to do English and all the crap you have to do in college. And I was a lousy student. And I thought, you know what? Wouldn't it be easier to join and then convince them to let me go than to try to stay out of the draft? Anybody as old as I know in the 60s, you were wearing your mother's underwear to the draft board. You were doing anything you could think of, staying up all night, taking speed for 3 days, anything you could possibly think of for them to look at you and go, pooh, you don't belong here, go home. But I thought, no, that's not going to work because, Vietnam was pretty popular, as it were, and they were taking a lot of kids. So I thought, I'll join, and then I'll make up a story. And they'll go, God darn it, John, you should have told us that earlier. We wouldn't have taken you. So I joined the Navy for 4 years. 5 months later, they asked me to go home because I told them a story, and they believed it. And I was interrogated by every officer on the base, psychiatrists, the CIA, the Office of Naval Intelligence, because they could not believe the story I told them was true, that I was merely using it to get out. And I spent 33 months being interrogated by these guys. At the end of the 3 months, the head shrink looked at me and said, "If you are telling us the truth, you're a sick puppy. If you're not telling us the truth, you better become an actor." So they threw me out of the Navy with an honorable discharge because the story I told them was so insane, and trained to be in essence, this is a slight embellishment, but not much. I was being trained to be a spy. My job would have been the same job as the men on the USS Pueblo had, intercepting enemy code, sitting off the coast of Florida, Cuba, Russia, somewhere where there were bad guys. And they spent $50,000 investigating me before they allowed me to start this training. And this story I told them, they couldn't believe they didn't find this out. And so the only way to avoid that embarrassment was to give me an honorable discharge so that there would not have to be any attachments to the discharge explaining why they had let me go. So once again, I was given proof that if you tap dance enough, you can get away with anything that you want to get away with. There is no lie that is so outlandish that if you really have the gumption, you can't make somebody believe. And that lesson was proven to me over and over and over again. Now, obviously, in the midst of all of this, when, I'm out there, I'm not thinking, God, your life is so screwed up. Look what you're doing with your life. I mean, that was like, hey. I am just so cool. Directly after the Navy, I moved to Colorado, quite honestly, because the man that made my LSD lived there and I wanted to be close to the source. I thought it would go bad in transit. So I moved to a small town in the mountains of Colorado, worked as a bartender, and ate LSD every day for a year. Every morning we would wake up and put about that much pure LSD 25 on our oatmeal. Pour it over our oatmeal. And spend the rest of the day blazing through the Rocky Mountains. It was a great year. During that year, I saw a vision. One that was actually there. A beautiful, naked woman standing under a waterfall in the Rocky Mountain National Park. I walked up to her. I asked her to marry me. She said yes. We moved to San Francisco, got married on the Golden Gate Bridge. That was a mistake. She was crazier than I. Only afterwards did I find out that she had been engaged 12 times before to be married. And broke off her last engagement because her fiancé was in jail for killing his homosexual lover. I can pick 'em. So I moved with her back to New Orleans after spending time in Missouri at her family's ranch, watching her mother one morning try to strangle the maid for burning the bacon. Again, working this brilliant mind, I thought, I have to get out of this marriage. It's not good. So what elaborate charade am I going to have to invent to do this? Because certainly looking at her and saying, you know something, I don't think this is working out. And probably it would be best for our emotional health if we split up. I couldn't take responsibility for that. So I went into the French Quarter of New Orleans, where I was living, found a friend of mine, a prostitute, a rather large, beautiful African-American lady named Edna. I mean, large. And timed it so that my wife would come home and find us in bed together. She left. And I got out of that again without taking any responsibility for it. Honey, no, it was just, oh, no, don't leave. Edna was just coward. So it just went on like that. I mean, it just went on like that. It's like a bad Peter Fonda movie, In 1971, I was offered a job to come to California to work for a record company that just began. I went to San Diego, lived there for 2 years, and realized that I really should be an actor, because I realized there was a place where they actually paid you to lie. I moved to California, was successful very quickly, got into a play in 1974, got an agent from that play, met a woman in that play whom I married on July 4th, 1975. A British woman. Seemed appropriate to marry an English lady on American Independence Day to me. July 4th, 1975. She and I are still married. No, sorry. She's sicker than I am. She's a wonderful, phenomenal person who knew that I had something to work out. She looked at me one day and said, listen, I know you want to die, and that's okay. Would you just not do it in front of the children? She had a daughter at the time. Her father, the girl's father, was deceased. We had a son, Elizabeth and I, in 1977. In 1977, I was doing this little series I mentioned earlier, the first series, getting drunk and stoned every day. I lost that job. I was fired by the star of that show, Robert Conrad, because I was just unmanageable. I was just unmanageable. He couldn't trust me, and I don't blame him. So from that moment, 1977, when my son was born, when he was 2 years old, I left. Coincidence? From 1977 until 1982, when I got sober, I consider that my season in hell. That's when the really bad shit happened. That's when the LSD was cut with strychnine, philosophically speaking. That's when I would disappear for days on end. That's when I almost killed myself several times in cars, or waking up with houses on fire and thinking it's morning because of the bright light next to my head. Waking up being disturbed by this constant knocking. Who the hell is knocking? And realizing it's me driving my car, knocking over the reflectors on the Santa Monica freeway in the middle of the lane. It really started turning ugly. And I yet didn't know why. Bad luck. Yeah, everybody's got bad luck. I sent my wife to live in England with our children, to stay with her mother, because I thought it would be easier for me to pursue work. And she could live for free for a while in her house in England. I moved on to a sailboat and basically lay down for 3 months, snorting heroin, urinating in an orange juice bottle, and not moving. For some miracle, well, I don't really believe in miracles, through some synchronicity, I was offered a job that allowed me to get her back to this country. And it went on and off like that. Bad, ugly. I disappeared all the time. I came to on planes, having no idea where I was going. Literally. Trying to figure out where I was going without actually being stupid enough to have to ask somebody, where's this plane going? Listening to the accents of the stewardesses, which they were called at the time. Southern? Am I going south? Invariably, it would either be New Orleans, back home, or San Francisco. Because New Orleans, I could hide. I could hide really well in New Orleans, and I would disappear. And that's the kind of drunk I was. I would go away for a week or 2 weeks at a time. Flash forward. Summer of 1981, I had done one of these disappearing acts. To cover my ass, because I knew Elizabeth was getting to the point where it was going to be like, sorry, buddy, it's just, it was sort of fun, but, I don't want to be married to Peter O'Toole or Richard Burton. It's just not what I had in mind. So after this disappearing act, I thought, how can I cover my tracks legitimately? So I came back to L.A. and I checked myself into a hospital. Because I thought, I will call my wife and say, you know what, I couldn't call you. I checked into this hospital because I think I might have a drinking problem. and they wouldn't let me use the phone for the first week. So, but I did. I checked myself into a hospital, and they put me in a room, because I really was in trouble by this point. And they put me in this room, and on the bedside table was the big book. And I read it that day. I'm kind of like a speed reader kind of guy. I've just read all my life. I can absorb material very quickly. So I read this book, closed it at about 7 o'clock that evening, and went, holy shit, I'm an alcoholic. Whew. Thank God. Now I can drink in peace. Now that I know what the problem is, never occurred to me. Never once occurred to me. I was not one of those guys who kept thinking, if I could only stop drinking, my life would be better. If I could only stop. I never wanted to stop drinking. I was like Dylan Thomas. Dylan Thomas was once asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he said, Daddy, I want to be the drunkest man in the world. And that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be the drunkest man in the world. Just prior to this, I did a movie called, doesn't matter what it was called. It was a comedy with Bill Murray and John Candy and a bunch of other guys. We were in Kentucky for a long time doing this, an army movie. And John Lennon died during the process of us doing this movie, and I was drunk for a month, every single day. But so was everybody else. We really had an Irish wake for John Lennon when he died. And it was right after that I disappeared. So I never thought the alcohol was the problem. Between that summer, July of 81 and February of 82, it started seeping into my mind a little that maybe my life could be different if I didn't get so screwed up all the time. February 5th, 1982, I was sitting at a friend's table. I'd just been fired from an acting job, and God's honest truth, not because of anything weird that I had done. Network saw me, thought I was too tall, recast the role, but the producers had already cast me, so they had to pay me. Great. Paycheck, don't have to work for it. I was sitting at a table with a friend, as we had done many, many times, a bottle of Maker's Mark and half an ounce of cocaine. Doing lines, drinking. I just recovered from, during the making of this movie I mentioned earlier, Stripes. The movie was called Stripes. I almost cut my nose off doing a scene. Scene where I'm running down a hall, I hit a door, the door didn't open, my face goes through this plate glass window in the door. Cut my nose almost in half. I was still reeling from that. So I'm sitting at this table, and I'm bloated, as we all are toward the end. As we used to say in New Orleans, it looks like I was, smuggling doorknobs under my face. Gin blossoms, I could have done the W.C. Fields story that day. And I will preface this by saying I am a true agnostic. I'm not an atheist. I'm not a theist. I'm an agnostic. And if you want to know what that is, I'll explain it in a bit more precisely. But sitting at that table, and all of a sudden, I am literally standing across the room, looking at me, sitting at that table, going on and on about the bullshit business. Wait till I run the place. And it's going to be the right kind of business. And as I'm standing there, this little thought comes across my mind. What a sorry loser asshole. Just those words. And then I'm back sitting at the table. And I stopped in the middle sentence, looked at the fellow sitting across the table from me, who I'd been drunk and stoned with many, many, many times, and said, you know what, I'll be right back. I got up from the chair at that table, walked out of his house, got into whatever piece of crap car I could have owned at the time, drove back to Elizabeth and my house, and that was it. Over. Done. 11:30, February 5th, 1982. I was struck sober. There was not a moment after that incident where I was ever tempted, cajoled, itched, wondered if, gone. Absolutely gone. Like Carl Jung talked about. There was a fundamental shift in my perception sitting at that table, and it couldn't shift back. It just wouldn't shift back. The next morning I woke up, opened the Yellow Pages, called Alcoholics Anonymous, and said, I live in Hollywood, where's there one of those meeting things? They sent me to a church on Yucca in Hollywood at a Wednesday, I think. Noon meeting. And been sober ever since. And the thing about it is that as much as I fought the idea of being a member of a group, particularly being as Catholic as I walked into that meeting and there were, myriads of weird-looking people, I mean, this is, you're just leaving the 70s. So there are these disco ghosts who are still prancing about in platform shoes and Rod Stewart hair and bizarre Hollywood types. I mean, really bizarre at the time. And I thought, here are the rest of the lepers. I've been looking for them for so long. Where have you been? It was just the absolute right place for me to walk into. And I don't think God did it because I don't talk to God a whole lot. I think his existence is non-provable and I think his non-existence is non-provable. So I keep a rather neutral ground on that. And I don't know how it came about, but I would love to have one day thanked Bill Wilson or whoever came up with the wording of the second step. Because it allowed me an in spiritually into this program without the word God. I didn't have to look any further than gravity to find a power greater than myself. And so that's what I used. Actually, gravity was my higher power for the first 2 years of my sobriety. And, as maybe it was all those years of being pounded by zealots, rigorously indoctrinated into a manner of living that called for strict adherence to certain principles that allowed me to so willingly, so lovingly, and so almost psychotically accept the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. To the point where my first sponsor had to stop me once he found out that I would take the big book and go into bars and find the drunkest guy sitting there and slap the book on the table between us. He explained the whole attraction rather than promotion thing to me. But I was a zealot. I was emancipated. I was, whatever the fourth dimension is, babe, it was where I got shot to immediately. It was such a relief not to be drunk anymore. Not to feel like there was something missing in my life. And my relationship with God today is the same as it's always been. Much like Woody Allen talked about that most people think he's an atheist, but God knows he's just a loyal opposition. And that's how I am. I don't pray. I meditate every day. True meditation, Zen, sitting meditation. And if the program is true, ever more will be revealed, and I'm willing to have it revealed. But for the time being, I will use the acronym Group of Drunks to stand for God, and I have for 20-odd years. My first sponsor was an atheist, a true atheist. Jewish and atheist. And I looked at him one day and I said, you realize you're defending your position just as strongly as Christians defend their position. So you believe just as strongly as they believe. Prove to me that there is no God. And he couldn't do that. How can you prove to me there's no God? Prove to me there is a God. Can't do that either, as far as I'm concerned. But the humanity that I have, the fellowship that I have with anybody that sits in the room of Alcoholics Anonymous. Maybe that's the equation. Maybe that's where the Trinity lives. And being so Catholic, it's hard for me not to relate in religious terms. So I use them. I go to Mass every Sunday. My children went to Catholic schools. I'm a lector in the church where I live in my small town. I received communion. And it's a great fellowship. It's another kind of fellowship to me. And it's fine. I don't have to believe any of it. When I was a kid, the first time I read Nietzsche and I read the line, faith is that which they want you to believe that they can't prove. Well, I need no proof that this works. You know, I don't have to have faith that Alcoholics Anonymous works. If you're, what else is there for us? And there isn't anything else for me. You know, I have been so lucky, I guess. And I would use the word blessed, but that indicates a blessor. Thin ice for me, right? I'll tell you. But just pragmatically, let me say this for anybody that's newer than I, or who's really kind of just beginning, etc. You know, and I'm not I don't know the big book by heart. I can't quote pages, and I read it rigorously. I love reading it. I believe that the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous may be one of the more profound spiritual addendums ever written in the history of man, from the Bhagavad Gita to the Quran to the Bible. Just those 12 admonitions for us is, profound. So profound. It's so interesting also, that logistically, they were writing the book at the same time that there was a very famous yogi in America, Yogananda, whose Diary of a Yogi was a very popular book in the 60s and stuff. And he was in America touring for the first time. And Alan Watts was also starting to bring Buddhist theory and philosophy to America during the 30s, was the first time. This idea of letting go. Now, every great religion talks about that. And I have accepted that. Jesus Christ said the kingdom of God is within you. The Buddhists said, do not look beyond yourself for your own salvation. Bill Wilson said, it's an inside job. It's me. I am the answer. You know? But I need every one of you to keep reflecting that back to me so that I don't live in a vacuum. Because if I'm left to my own devices, my little guy, the one that likes to disprove reality, gets really busy and happy. You know, the committee. Everybody knows the committee, right? They're up and working before I ever wake up. And unless I have something to do as soon as I wake up to tell them to shut up, they're going to be convincing me that I have to do something that day to protect myself. I don't have to do anything to protect myself. I work in a business where there are people whose lives are there to soothe my ego, to give me what I want. Even if it's not good for them, they're willing to give it to me in hopes that I will do something for them. It's one of the worst businesses to be in if you're trying to be humble. You don't try to be. You can't try to be humble. My friend Cubby once described humility, and you won't find it in a dictionary, but I use it every day. My definition of humility is that I am willing to admit that there is someone else who can teach me something about my own life. And that's in these rooms. I love this program. I don't know where it came from. I don't know why it's here. I don't know why it works. I don't know why it works more than it does. I'm very sorry sometimes when I see how much it doesn't work. How many people just can't. What are you, nuts? It is so simple. Don't drink. Go to meetings. You won't get drunk. Your gums will stop bleeding. Your pants won't be covered in crap anymore. You know, I've tried to help so many guys. Now, I've worked with so many guys, just like I'm sure many of you have, where you want so desperately for them to be able to view that which you viewed. And that moment of clarity, you want so much to give that to them. And you can't. You really, really can't. It's great. And I'm going to leave you with a joke, because it's how I feel about God and how I think God feels about my sobriety. I care about how you feel about my sobriety, because without you, I don't think I would stay sober. Or if I would, let me rephrase that. Without the 12 steps, I wouldn't stay sober. I'm sure there are men in this country. I belong to a little online group of men all over the world. Soldiers, a lot of soldiers, who have no face-to-face meetings to go to, have no one that they can talk to about this except those little typed words on a page. Guys in Kosovo, guys in Iraq, guys in Afghanistan, where they have to sit in their tents at night and try to reach out to touch another alcoholic. And they stay sober because they have that connection, that small connection. A man has $5,000 in his hand, but he owes the mob $10,000. And unless he gets it to them, they are going to kill him. He is desperate. He walks into a church, gets on his hands and knees, and says, God, please help me. I need to double this money. I have $5,000. If I don't get $10,000, I am a dead man. The church is silent. And then all of a sudden he hears a voice from the ceiling, somewhere in the ceiling, say, go to Las Vegas. So he does. He has just the $5,000, enough for a bus ticket, gets on a bus, goes to Las Vegas, gets off the bus at the Greyhound bus station, and stands outside on the boulevard, and the voice says, go to Caesar's Palace. So he walks over to Caesar's Palace. Standing at the door, the voice again, boomingly says, go to the blackjack table. Goes to the blackjack table, sits down, the voice says, bet it all. But bet it all. So he puts the $5,000 down, gets dealt the cards. The dealer has a 10 showing. He looks at his hand. He has a 12. The voice says, take a hit. Hit me. 7. Guy has 19. He says, okay, that's good, because the possibility of take another hit. The guy, God, take another hit. Hit me. An ace. 20. Now he's at least a push. He knows he's at least a push. And he's about to take another hit. But God, you don't understand. I've got 20. Take another hit. Hit me. Another ace. 21. The voice says, I don't fucking believe it. That's how God feels about my sobriety. Thank you for letting me share. I'm sorry I was late.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Sobercast is ad-free, and we'd like your help in order to keep it that way. So if you'd like to help us be self-supporting by pledging $1 or $2 a month, visit Sobercast.com and look for the donate links. Thank you very much.